Hey, Ghost Machine fans, this one's for you. Welcome to the very first episode of the Ghost Machine Fans podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. This episode is airing on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024, which just so happens to be the release date for the first three Ghost Machine Comics ongoing series, which are Geiger, Redcoat, and Rook, Exodus. These three series were preceded by the Geiger Limited Series, the Junkyard Joe Limited Series, the Geiger 80-page one-shot, and the most recent Ghost Machine #1, which came out in January of this year. My name is Nick, aka Ghost Machine Fan, and I beseech you to hit up www.ghostmachinefans.com, where you'll find a landing page directing you to our wiki, forums, this podcast, and our Instagram page. Speaking of the wiki, we need contributors. We've created over 150 articles related to Ghost Machine characters, comics, and creators, and we need your help to build out the descriptions. Let us know if you want to join the crew at ghostmachinefans@gmail.com. That's also the best email address to use if you're interested in trolling or heckling us, as all feedback is welcome. Our plan is to discuss the comics that came out the week prior every Wednesday, thus giving us all time to read them. We'll be touching on what you can use as a primer for the series that came out today in this episode. I'm joined tonight by some special guests who are going to assist me in commemorating this momentous event. First and foremost, Simon Pure, aka Redcoat, is actually walking into the studio right now. It was very difficult to pin Simon down with how busy his schedule is. Actually, I've some good news for you, Nicholas. Wait, what is this? Your coat isn't red. You're Benedict Arnold, Redcoat's nemesis. What have you done with Simon? Let's not be naive, my good chap. You've got the real immortal in the studio now. Consider it an upgrade. Now, let's tally-ho and on with the show. Don't be ridiculous. Just because you're another immortal doesn't mean you get to be on the podcast. You're not the one with his ongoing series coming out today. You're his nemesis. I'm afraid I must take umbrage with such an accusation, Nicholas. The fact that the delinquent, as Simon Pure, could capture any audience's attention for more than mere minutes is fallacious. He is but a dirty miscreant who bumbled into immortality after attempting to assassinate George Washington at the Battle of Trenton. You and I know very well that the Founding Fathers would have no intention of granting such power to one of his ilk. Well, right, but that's kind of the point of the character, though. Absurd! What do you mean? Well, in a lot of the adverts for Redcoat, he's described as kind of a tool that can never get it together, no matter how many opportunities his immortal life affords him. He still wears the ratty old coat, even all the way into 2050, when Tariq Geiger is taking on the warlords of Las Vegas. And even after all that time, he's just a mercenary for hire who can't save a dime. And on top of all that, we have no idea exactly how he gained his powers. This new series is going to fill in so many of the blanks that fans have been waiting for. Exactly, Nicholas. What sort of protagonist is that? One that comic book readers tend to identify with and like a lot. I feel defeated. Well, you should feel defeated, and you should feel ashamed. I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to however Simon kicks your butt in the book. Let me call my next guest in here. I have a feeling he'll be able to help me recuse you from this situation. Joe. Hey, Junkyard Joe, can you come clean up this mess that is Benedict Arnold? Offense! I take offense! Unhand me, you mechanical ruffian! I'll sue! I'll sue! Thank you so much, Joe. As always, it's great to see you. How was your trip in? Sounds good. But Joe, buddy, you seem down. Normally you seem to have a sense of satisfaction when you clean up a mess for somebody else. What's going on, buddy? I see. You're upset because Simon's getting an ongoing and he didn't even have a limited series. And you're upset because Geiger is getting an ongoing series after he had a 6-issue limited series like yours, but you don't have one coming out today. I feel you, Joe, but you're part of the unnamed. You and the Northerner both got full-page spreads in Ghost Machine #1. The fans are buying up your first appearances. You're a huge part of this new shared universe. That's right. The third book coming out with an ongoing isn't even part of the unnamed. Rook Exodus is a whole separate deal set on another planet, farmed by a corporation and left abandoned to wardens who control their animal drifts things with really cool Jason Fabok art. Whoa, don't get me wrong. Fabok and Gary Frank are both in my top 5 favorite comic book artists. But that Brad Anderson color art, chef's kiss. Am I right? Well, hey, Joe, chin up. You're the glue that holds the unnamed together. Without your limited series, we'd never have found out how Unit Beta made it all the way to Las Vegas 2050. Remember, Junkyard Joe can help. We'll see you in your next cameo, partner. That was a whirlwind of appearances for the first episode of a new podcast. Let's circle the wagons and discuss some things. If you've arrived here, then you likely know what Ghost Machine Comics is. Ghost Machine was originally branded as Mad Ghost Comics in 2021 with the release of the Geiger 6-issue limited series, followed by the Geiger 80-page Giant and the Junkyard Joe limited series, both in 2022. Geiger and Junkyard Joe were written by Jeff Johns, with art by Gary Frank and color art by Brad Anderson. You probably have heard of those guys working together on books at DC Comics like Batman Earth 1 and Doomsday Clock. They're kind of a big deal over there. The Geiger 80-page Giant book featured several other creators who assisted in the short stories contained therein, including the first full appearance of Simon Pure, aka Redcoat. This past January, the publisher took on many new creators and rebranded as Ghost Machine Comics with the release of Ghost Machine #1, which has paved the way for several other creator-driven books that Ghost Machine Comics will be putting out. We will deep dive into both of the series and the one-shots on episodes during weeks without new releases, although I will be providing you with minor synopses of Geiger and Junkyard Joe in this episode as a primer for your further Ghost Machine adventures. So what is Ghost Machine? Why all the hullabaloo? Why are we doing an entire podcast about this? To tell you a little bit about me, I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. I remember vividly when Image launched, and Valiant was really cool too. Based on the variety of ages of the folks on the Facebook group that I'm in, I bet there's only about half the people listening to this that may remember that time as vividly as I do. And there's something very distinct about the characters called the Unnamed in these Ghost Machine books that makes me think of classic Valiant comics. In brief, classic Valiant comics had mostly new characters, a few that they had bought from another older company that hadn't been seen for decades. But so essentially everything was new. The universe was new. The emphasis was on storytelling and color art over like flashy kind of machismo art and like the Image style, but very much on story. And something that they were very well known for was a crossover called Unity, where they crossed over like 11 books or something. That's how many different characters they had that interacted. So it was kind of a lot, but it was also when all of those characters were new. So it was exciting to be a kid at that time because it was like a totally new thing. It wasn't as if it was Spider-Man or Iron Man or even the X-Men, because the X-Men were the thing then, if you were into that. But in these Unnamed comics, specifically the characters in Geiger, which for the most part takes place in 2050, which is 20 years after the Unknown War, which goes off in 2030. And that's when Tariq Geiger becomes Geiger. Spoilers. And then his story takes place in 2050. Then Redcoat his story starts all the way back in the days of George Washington and, spoilers, spans to, as far as you know, 2050 in various forms over the course of his many appearances. Many, not many, M-I-N-I, many small appearances in the few things that he's been in leading up to his series and before Ghost Machine #1. But also in Junkyard Joe, what's interesting is at the end of the Geiger story, the robot, Unit Beta, gets back and sent out by what's left of the United States government to stop Geiger. Then we have a series come out after that that's called Junkyard Joe, and that series takes place in during the era of Vietnam. It's about a robot that goes into Vietnam and somehow is able to, via its AI, deduce that it doesn't feel that the conflict is worthwhile. Let's just say that without going into the lengthy thing that we'll do on an episode about that trade paperback. And, this story evolves from there, eventually leading back to a more modern time, like nowadays. And then we also see Junkyard Joe later in 2050. So you're seeing like multiple characters there. There's also a character called the Northerner who has one line in this interesting panel where you're looking through Junkyard Joe's eyes and you see him looking at Redcoat with Northerner and Geiger standing there. And the Northerner says, Junkyard Joe can do it. That's what I was referencing earlier when I was speaking with Joe. He was here. The interwoven nature of the stories, it's like in Pulp Fiction. All the characters have their own little stories, but then they mesh together. I guess that's a rather crass tangent, but you get the point. And it's been done in such a teasing manner with some of these characters. And I think that's why everybody's really into this Redcoat guy. Because they're like, man, just give us the actual story. Because we know he's an immortal. We know like it somehow has to do with him trying to kill George Washington. And then George Washington has this power of the founding fathers that emits from like an amulet. All this stuff is on the wiki. And emits from this amulet that looks a lot like the symbol for the Freemasons. But it's a little different. We also see that symbol later in the present when Muddy Davis takes out Joe's dog tags. So you're talking about continuity city. You know what I'm saying? It's not 11 characters and 11 monthly titles and everything like it was back in the Valiant days. So it's more digestible to me. And it's been like a couple years coming. This is the first time that they're putting out a few that they're saying are ongoing. And there's a whole bunch more titles coming out in the future as well. So that's where it, to me, also has been called Image 2.0, which I think there have been plenty of things that have launched through Image, but the typical Image book is like a creator-owned thing, and that's the nature of Image comics, and they can either do it through one of the publishing houses that exist within Image, or they can still do it on their own, is the impression that I have. And that is why most of those books are like, 6 to 14 issues or whatever. And that's cool. That's what you usually get from Image. But this is different because this is a shared universe. And that's just the unnamed guys. So with Ghost Machine #1, it's a lot more like Image comics back in the day because they're coming out with all these other creator-driven books that are, it doesn't make it totally clear that they're going to all share the same universe per se, but I'm sure they're going to have ways to do so, which is exactly what happened back in the day with Image. You had Youngblood and you had Wildcats and you had, Supreme and Spawn and Shadowhawk, all those different Stormwatch was the one I was trying to think of. And all these different characters that did all these different things, and Shaman's Tears and Savage Dragon, and that's cool. But then they all kind of went and did their own thing, and there's only a handful of those that are left. Like Spawn and Savage Dragon are still going, and Wildstorm stuff is going with DC, but that's kind of different. And so with these other books that they have coming out, for example, I was bummed at first because the one thing I wasn't really going to be able to do with this podcast was share it very much with my son, because as much as I love the content, it's like a lot of it's sad or serious, and the art is fantastic, but then also fantastically graphic in some cases, just with the Geiger and the Junkyard Joe book so far. Then I pick up Ghost Machine #1, and there's this Rocketfellers story, and it's specifically family driven. It said it's one of the family odysseys for Ghost Machine. And it's like, okay, sweet. Like, and I read the book. It's or not the book. It's a short story. I think it's a couple of pages in the book. And it's pretty cool. It's about a family from the future that has to come into the past, basically like kind of like a witness protection thing, or they have to hide from this thing called Vertex that's hunting for them. And they're doing it by being in the past, so they have to fake it, but they have all this like neat technology about them that makes them hiding that inherently humorous and quaint or whatever. But each of them kind of has their own identity. That is neat because that's a book my son Bruce can read, is the impression that I have. I don't think there's anything that's going to be too crazy in that. And the art was really cool as well. And then they had an interesting one called Halo and Hornsby, which it seems to be about the idea of taking a child angel at birth and giving it to a demon family, and then taking the vice versa, right? So a child demon at birth and giving it to an angel family, and then determining what happens. And the way that they get there in the story is it's interesting. They both play baseball, and you can see they both have powers. And their parents both react in different ways that don't really match their demeanor per se. But then when you flip to the page that's like a character description page, it reminds me of the back of a trading card in the 90s. They had a bunch of these in Ghost Machine #1. There were like bios of all the characters. And I specifically remember those because as a kid, I used to make photocopies of transparencies at my dad's office so I could put them on the projectors on the wall. So they had those info cards in Ghost Machine #1. And on that, for these characters, they really explain, oh, okay, that's exactly what happened. This one is a child demon. This one is a child angel. And they're trying to determine if nature will win over nurture by putting them in opposing families than they would normally be. So it's like, well, that's interesting. Is that one going to go on as long as Geiger and Redcoat? I don't know. I'm not saying it shouldn't, but you know what I mean? Like that's a bit of more of a niche story, but that's also like probably going to be a lot of fun to read. And then you can tell they're really trying to cover a lot of bases as a brand, which I'm all about. You know, if that helps them be successful and we get more books and they stay longer, more continuity, etc., then it seems like they're trying to also carve out a niche in the supernatural thing with this Hyde Street book. And it's got really cool Ivan Rice art. He's done, I think, every DC character that there is, it looks like. He did a lot of Justice League stuff, a lot of Aquaman stuff. I know I've read a lot of books that he's drawn. And the way, especially in this book, his short story for Hyde Street was inked. It really is a cool, darker, supernatural feel. And I think the premise I get is that they're saying that no matter where you go, there's always a Hyde Street. So there's always like a darker layer under what you are used to seeing kind of deal. Like, kind of reminds me of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, or just like there being another layer of things beyond what you know. But it's obviously very magically inclined, but pretty graphic. Like a character gets mowed down by like a bus in it or something like that. But there's a Boy Scout, and you know, that's cool. He was happy. So that's that one. And but last but not least at all, I would get stoned by the audience if I didn't talk about Rook Exodus, which is probably the book some people are more excited about than the Redcoat book, because it has been the cover of like half the variants for Ghost Machine #1. The character looks super cool. The art's by Jason Fabach, and it's another one Jeff Johns wrote. The thing about it is it takes place on this planet called Exodus that a corporation had sent people to like farm and take over and do stuff with the land and terraform. That's the word. And so it didn't work out, but in the process, they had established these people called wardens who had to be tied to certain animal groups because it was a result of what they were doing. Their terraforming process was causing the animals to be like way bigger than normal. So they had to have wardens for groups of animals of each type that could control them. And they called their groups drifts. So there's a dude named Swine who has like cool armor and of course a pig helmet deal who can like control his drift of like super warthogs. And then there's a dude named Rook who looks really cool. He has like the 2 guns like in the Matrix and this whole thing. And he's got like crows flying all around him. Very 90s. And so he can control rooks, ravens, and crows, is what it says in his description. And what happened was the corporation pulled out because it didn't work out, but then they left all these wardens and, like, I guess some other people. And so now the planet is, like, overrun by what's left of them. And Rook wants to go, Swine wants to stay, but he's going to help Rook do what he needs to go. So Rook can go, Swine still says he wants to stay. And that's the story as we know it, except at the end there's this direwolf character, which is a female character that can control these giant wolves. And her bio card in Ghost Machine #1 was super cool too. A lot of information to digest in that one issue, but it is a great primer. There's 1 million copies of it out there. It won't be hard to find. If you go to any local comic shop, I guarantee you they will have at least one of the many variant covers they made. And it wasn't obnoxious how many they made. It wasn't like, some of these books nowadays you see like 50 variants. I think they had maybe 15 or something like that. And that includes the ones that came only at MegaCon. It is abundantly clear that they are trying to establish a universe and a brand. There's only like 14, 15 books out already in terms of issues. If I separate the volumes of like Geiger 1 through 6, etc., Junkyard Joe 1 through 6, that's not a lot of comics, boys and girls. That means that we have all the content that we know right there. But they're launching a ton of stuff. So that means that if we have a receptacle for information, aka a wiki, we have built one. If you go to www.ghostmachinefans.com and you'll see a landing page, go to the fandom wiki and contribute to it. So there's like characters, locations, events, and if you go to the top of it, you'll see pull downs. Especially cool is if you go to the comics one and then go to issues. If you go to individual issues, they will have cover galleries, which is something that we did because it was like, well, what do you always like? That's one of the things. If I want to make sure I have all the variants, or I just want to see how many there are, and in one place, bam, you got it right there. So other than that, it's bare bones. As we go, like we want to get it up to date as quick as we can, and then have some descriptions added. You can go in there. It doesn't matter who you are. You can comment on it, and then based on what you say, we can add it and credit you. Or if you say some crazy stuff that is like nothing to do with Ghost Machine, then we just would say thank you, but no thank you. And we wouldn't do that, which is what that system is designed to do. But then obviously if you like contribute a lot, or it's someone we know because you've been on the show or whatever, and you're a credible source, I think we can make you like an admin and you can just do that stuff. And so that's like when I go in there, it lets me do that stuff. If you're interested in that, let me know. Too, if you need any direction or whatever, you can also email us at ghostmachinefans@gmail.com. But that's the thing. Let's be real, folks. I'll have Joe with me probably until the Unknown War starts in 2030. But he's not much of a chatter, and I'll never be able to book Simon Pure again. And I don't want to bring Benedict Arnold back. So if there's anyone out there interested in co-hosting with me or coming on the show like once or twice and talking about the books that came out the week before last, or if you know I'm not going to be doing an episode about books that came out because there was a week that was off, like a bye week, and we want to talk about like a character or a run or the value, you can even talk about speculation on these books or whatever, then, let me know and we can arrange something like that. The intention is for this to create a community as well as meet some new friends who are into this as much as we are. And the way it is going to work is that a week from today, we'll release an episode where we focus on the books that came out today. So that's Rook Exodus #1, Redcoat #1, and Geiger #1. So every week after that, without releases, will be a deep dive week into different Ghost Machine comics or stuff if there's no comics that came out. So as the music rolls, I shall remind you that we also have some forums established. Forums are great because it allows us to immortalize conversations from the very beginning. If we want to talk about fan theories about the founding fathers versus the unnamed and where it's going, I guarantee you it'll be interesting if we do it as we read the books. And then the conversations can be updated as we go with new and different ideas. We've also got an Instagram going out there. Check it out. That's really just for fun, trying to connect everybody, let everybody know what's going on, but we try to post on there every day. Well, thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight. We'll see you next time on the Ghost Machine Fans Podcast.